The off-season is almost here, and that means the trade period. Tune in to the Footy Mailbag podcast feed for the Moving Parts podcast. Look out for episodes starting this October.
You are listening to the Footy Mailbag podcast with Damo and Clara.
Hello and welcome to the Footy Mailbag. My name is Damo, and in this very special episode, we are taking a look at AFLW Fantasy, and helping me do that is Liam from Free Kick, the AFLW Fantasy podcast. Thanks for being here, Liam.
Pleasure to be on, Damo. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about the podcast. Tell us about how it all comes together and the other people that you have with you.
Yeah, so we started the Free Kick tour. This is our third season now. We've been playing the Moreira's Magic unofficial version of the game. It's myself, Jono and Mel. We kind of all knew each other kind of outside of the fantasy world, but we knew that there was a space for a resource, and we'd done fairly well in that first season. And we've got Will on board, who's a bit of an almanac when it comes to all things AFLW, and myself and Jono are kind of men's fantasy kind of through and through for a long time. So combine it all together, and yeah, it's our third season now. This is our first season as well as the kind of official podcast for the AFLW Fantasy platform, which is a cool opportunity. And our podcast's going out on there. And yeah, we do pretty classic, standard fantasy content, doing a wrap up every wrap up ep at the beginning of every week, and then maybe a bit of live content when teams come out. So all pretty par for the course, but there was just a gap for it in the AFLW space.
Excellent opportunity for you guys for sure. AFLW kicks off on Friday, August 30, when the Swans take on Collingwood at North Sydney Oval. So that is this coming Friday. And so if you haven't got a team together, there is still time to get a team together. So Liam, how we'll do this is we'll go through each line from defence working up the field, and we'll take a look at some options to build a team, and we'll do it in categories of overpriced, too good to pass up, breakouts, traps, and rookies. So let's start in defence. Who's probably overpriced in defence, you would say?
I would say number one most likely player to be overpriced is Emma Carney. She's the second most expensive defender. That just comes down to the fact that she's probably at 37, due for some slight regression this season. And in particular, I think that there's going to be some new pieces in that backline. At North, Nicole Bresnahan is someone they've pegged to kind of take her role. She spent a little bit of last year injured, but should be fit and firing to start this year. And then they also pulled across Libby Birch, who's been an intercept defender at Melbourne for quite a long time and has a decent scoring pedigree, kind of pushing 50 in the past. So I wouldn't be picking Emma Carney to start the year, an upgrade target only, and that's if she does hold that scoring.
So she's probably priced at her highest point at the moment, you would say?
I would say so, yeah. I'd expect she's priced at an average of 71.7. An average in the mid-60s is what I'd be expecting, and that's one thing with AFLW Fantasy. Price movements are extremely rapid, so having a premium really with the capability of going low is a big risk, and so I'd be avoiding.
Who's too good to pass up? Who's come in at such a good price that you can't not start with them?
Yeah, this is one that's a little difficult in defence, to be perfectly honest. So the number one candidate, though, is Ruby Schleicher. So this is someone who's been a top 1 to 2 defender in previous seasons. She had a run of 3 seasons in a row playing both defender and a defender/midfield role with an average of 65 to 70. Now, last season, she came into the season injured, played 2 games, then tore her PCL. So only averaged 49 and priced at an average of 61. But this is someone who did all of that 65 to 70 scoring in shorter game time. So last season, games were extended by about 12 to 13%. And we saw a bump in scoring from a lot of people on that basis. I think that there's capability for her to go over 70 and be a top 5 defender, priced where she is at that 60 mark. It is one of those ones where you go, well, I can't take the risk, and also too good to pass up because she's so highly owned. we know that she's someone who can score 100 plus as a defender, which is pretty rare. If she's super highly owned, does one of those in the first few rounds, you're really in a dark place. So I'd say that's the number one candidate.
I suppose the sideways option around her price is probably Karen Peterson. Is that her name from Carlton?
Yeah, that's the one. The problem with Kerr and Peterson is she comes into this season having played no preseason matches, and so we just don't know how necessarily she's going to fit in. And she's super versatile as well. Has played in the past a lockdown defensive role, intercepting role, a wing role, and a CBA role. And Carlton have had a lot of changeover in that back line. They've lost some key pieces. They've had some younger players who chopped and changed last season or go out to all parts of the comp. Karen Peterson is a more than capable defender, has been a top 5 to 6 a couple of seasons ago. It's just tough to say with confidence that she'll be able to come back straight into that role. And Carlton are also a team that really do struggle with chaining up across half-back and through the wing. They're a very handball-reliant team and often make kicks under pressure. So it'll be one where I wouldn't be shocked if I'm wrong and she becomes a player we have to have. But at this stage, and I just don't have confidence.
All right, we'll move on. Who's breaking out? Who's come in at a really good price and slightly lower than your premiums, but is going to break out and take that next step?
So this is one of those. This is a really difficult price category for defenders. I think there's a lot of defenders that are in that 700, 800K range that could push up into the top 5, but anything below that gets really difficult. The one that there's a couple of that you could point to. One of them is Shanae Goldrick at Melbourne. She's someone that is a bit of a utility, is in the game as a defender, but in the practice match and also the match simulation, which wasn't broadcast, but I live up the road from Icon Park, so I went down and watched. She is playing a more midfield-heavy role, also chopping out down back and up forward in a team, Melbourne, that lost 2 of their key defensive pieces, but also down a midfielder going to Hawthorn and then another midfielder to a broken face to start the year. So the role is there for her. Now, I don't know how I feel about calling a 34-year-old a breakout candidate, but she's number one. The second one is a bit cheaper, so she's $413K, so almost rookie price, but an overpriced rookie. So that's Serene Watson from St Kilda. She moved at the beginning of last year from the Gold Coast, was a junior winger / midfielder and intercepting defender. Didn't really score that well at St Kilda last year, but the role and that she showed in the practice match against West Coast, where she was their only kick-in taker, and additionally had that really helpful role sitting at the backside of defensive stoppages, shovel hand pass out to her, and she's the one taking the kick. And she did have a few beautiful kicks that actually set up some nice transition chains for St Kilda. So priced at $413K, even if she averages a 55, that's a breakout of such and one that'll set your cash generation going for, the first month of the season.
So she might not break out into a premium sort of scoring range, but she'll outperform her price bracket. It's a pretty good chance to outperform her price bracket.
I think she goes into that. I think she breaks out into the top 15 bucket because of the defenders. Most defenders average below 70. Anything that gets into the 60 bracket, I'd say there's 10, at least 15 defenders who'd sit in that bracket. I think she can push up into there, and at that point you throw a blanket and just say that's fine. Like I'll run her at D5 until the end of the year. I'm not going to be able to find enough points to take her up to someone else.
Okay. Who are the traps? Who are people going to pick because of the name, the price, the situation, and it's the scoring is just not there?
Yeah, the number one trap for me is Gabby Newton. So she's playing at Fremantle, played last season predominantly as a do-whatever-you-like defender at the Western Bulldogs. But everyone had her, a lot of teams had her because she had been a forward in the game. This year she comes to Fremantle. She's a former number 1 pick who's now played defence, midfield, forward, chop out, ruck, done the whole kit and caboodle. But she's definitely looked most comfortable as a forward and then played forward in the practice match. Forward for Fremantle is not a particularly fruitful role, particularly given I do think that they have some issues with entries inside 50. So if you go, well, former number 1 pick, I'll take the punt, I think you're setting yourself up for a 50. And that's just like not going to work.
Who knows if that changes for Fremantle this season, though, because they went and did a bit of shopping in the off-season. So, but I mean,
They shopped.
They've
They
got
shopped
Kiara
and
Bowers.
I just don't understand it.
They've got Kiara Bowers and Ange Stannett missing the whole season, though. So we could see all that shopping go to waste, especially this season. Who are the rookies?
Yeah, so number 1, well, there's actually a pretty decent crop of rookies in defence. The most expensive one that I think you can consider is Kate Lutkins. Now, it's hard to call someone who's, I think, 36 or 37 a rookie, but she's coming off an ACL injury. She came off an ACL and then she had a kid, so she missed basically most of the last 2 seasons. She's someone who's averaged 70 before, but that's in season 2. That doesn't really count. But Brisbane start off with a great run to start the year. She's possibly the most composed defender in the competition, so I wouldn't be shocked if she averages a 50. The other ones are Abby McDonald at Geelong. She's got some electric numbers in the VFLW, averaged basically 100, but with a ceiling score above 140 for the Cats VFLW team. And then there's a couple at Carlton. So there's Dana Finn, who's a former Irish basketballer who played bits and bobs last season, but she really popped as someone who took a few intercept marks, got involved in some change for Carlton in their match against Adelaide, had a decent pop score. I think she was their highest scoring defender, albeit again without Karen Peterson. I think she's capable of putting up a 50 as well. And then the final one is Lulu Beattie. She's someone who had not played before, but had been a former captain of her Coates League team, got taken pick 5 in the supplementary draft, which for people who aren't aware was like the draft that happened last year just because of the smaller gap between seasons. And yeah, she's looked comfortable. She looks like she's set up across halfback. The club is talking her up. Her vice captain, Mimi Hill, has talked her up. I think it's, again, a one to watch. And I think at 300k, she's easily the cheapest of the defensive rookies I think you could pick.
All right, let's move to the midfield. So that was the defense. Let's talk about the midfield now. Who's overpriced in the midfield?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. If you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I might have said Ash Riddell, but I saw what she did in the practice match on the weekend, and I just don't think I can get behind it. The one that I'm concerned about most, at least to start the year, is possibly my favourite player from last year, and that's Laura Gardner. So she's a midfielder at Sydney. My only query is Sydney sound like they're going to be rolling a host of their third-year players, so players that they drafted in the draft they had before their first season, in Montana Ham, who was pick 1, Sophia Hurley, who was inside the top 10, and then Cynthia Hamilton, who was also a first-round pick. They're all forward/midfielders, and then they already have at Sydney Chloe Malloy, who's a forward and midfielder, and then Tanya Kennedy, who they will definitely use as a tagger and run them through the midfield. So I do just wonder if that constant change means that Gardner sees maybe a little bit less time, or there are just some quieter games as some of those breakout options do take over some of her scoring. I don't say that with a lot of confidence. I think she's an absolute superstar and accumulates like few others, but maybe in the first month of this year, there are a few teething issues for her scoring that mean she drops below an incredibly high average of 115.
Who's too good to pass up at their price?
For me, it's Charlie Rowbottom. So she's 1.4 mil, but she is a freak. She's 180 centimetres. There are few people, if you imagine the kind of strongest you might have seen Patrick Cripps play, Charlie Rowbottom by comparison is stronger. anytime you think it's holding the ball, she gets her hands out. I don't think she ever really gets done or gets tackled and doesn't get a possession away. Gold Coast have lost their their fourth string midfielder, their kind of chop out in Ali Drennan, who's gone across the West Coast. And there's no one really there to back it up. So she's priced at 113. That includes an injured in the third quarter 87 that she scored in round 9 last year. She has an incredible run in her first month this year. And in the practice match in 3 quarters, put up 125. Like with 20, I think it was 29 disposals, 10 clearances, 10 tackles. She's a freak. And I think she's, of the crop of midfielders sitting below that 120 mark, she'd be my pick to push up into the kind of uber elite 120 plus tier.
In that same sort of price bracket, which Prasparka's sister would you pick? Maddie or Georgia?
Or
both?
Georgie. Oh, that is brutally tough. I think... So here's the problem. Like, I think that Georgie is the better fantasy scorer than Maddie. I think Georgie spreads better from stoppage. She's got a bit better size. It's probably got a better kick on her. And Maddie's got better hands, which often means she's a bit handball happy. Georgie, on the other hand, is a little bit more easily tagged. She really has struggled with that last season. And Geelong have a tough run of midfield runs to start the year versus Maddie, who has a near-perfect run. I as much as it pains me to do it, I'm a big Bombers fan, but I do think I'd be picking Georgie for the whole season over Maddie because I think long-term Georgie's a 110 player, whereas I think Maddie's probably capped below 105.
And Chloe Malloy can no longer be selected as a forward, but should people be deterred by that? Is she someone who people could still start with as a midfielder only?
Yeah, so Chloe Malloy, I'd be a little worried because if you look at her score build, it's 2 pop scores over 100, and then most of the rest of her scores were in the 70s last year. She's priced at 80. Now, the pop score was a 137. She still kicked 4 behinds as well, so it could have been 150 plus. But I think that Malloy was a bit of I think she was 60% CBAs last year. I wouldn't be shocked if she sits closer to 40% this year, if only because there's obviously those 3 other younger midfielders they're looking to roll through. And then also Alicia Newman, who'd played a bunch of games as a small forward last year, has gone to GWS. She's not the world's most integral piece, but Malloy is such a capable target and player inside 50. I think that she might struggle to present value for teams.
Let's move on to breakouts. Who is breaking out for you in the midfield?
Ooh, so my number one candidate for breakout to go to that uber elite tier is probably Elise Parker. She's priced at 96. She's really struggled to break through that 100 mark. Last year, she had some games where she was sitting deep forward, and also she had a couple of games where she was quite clearly hobbled with injury, and then another game where she got heavily tagged by West Coast. I think that we've heard word from the club that she's not playing forward again. That's a thing of the past. And it sounds like she's, gotten rid of those injuries, even managed to kick, I think, a goal with what ended up being pretty bad ankle injury that shut her down for the last 2 weeks. And I do think that Zali Goldsworthy, who's the option sitting there, who averaged just a bit below what she did, is probably going to be a tag target or someone that teams will try and stop more because she's so good at hitting the scoreboard as well. I think that Parker goes from 96 up above 100. I think she's got 10 points of upside potentially. Then the other 2 that are a bit cheaper that I think can become 100 plus. One of them is Sophia Hurley, who I just mentioned at Sydney. The thing that she has is elite foot speed, and she lays so many tackles when she's given time near the midfield. She had a couple of games towards the back end of last year at finals where she had 12, 13 plus tackles, which really does anchor a really great average. Then the other one to talk about is the other 2 I like Ella Roberts if she's given a midfield role. And that's certainly no guarantee because she's also an incredibly adept forward and a kind of forward half marking target. But she went at 105 when given 50 plus CBAs for the final month last year. And then the other one is a bit of a roughie, and that's Isabel Pritchard. She was her 2020. I think she went at pick 16, but was the fourth of four. Brisbane. Not Brisbane. Western Bulldogs first round picks, and she's probably the most adept of all of them. She's a 179 centimeter midfielder who did have some 100 plus scores at the back end of last year, and when given a midfield role of even over 30%, I think she averages 8 or 9 tackles, and she had an incredible couple of quarters in the Gold Coast preseason game, and then there was a streamed match simulation that the Dogs did against Richmond, and I would have said she was comfortably their best player. So I think that even though she's priced at below 80, I think that's another 100 plus potential scoring player there.
So we said earlier that there's no Kiara Bowers or Ange Stannett at Fremantle, and there's a term that we use on this podcast called void of significance. So obviously without those two players in the Dockers lineup, there's going to be that role that needs to be filled, and they brought in McCarthy and also Brazil and Newton and a whole bunch of players in the off season, but they've also got Hayley Miller there. They've got They've got other players that can.
There's a laundry list of options already there.
There's a whole lot of options that can fill that role. But who do you like the most to step into that void?
Oh, well, that's a bloody difficult question. Because if I was coach, I think Hayley Miller would be the number one candidate. She's done it the best before, and she's the most damaging of the laundry list of options that are there. She's got great foot speed, a great front of clearance, burst player, tackles, marks, hits the scoreboard, whatever. Having seen the practice match on the weekend, I do think that Ash McCarthy probably has the advantage of not being adept at playing in most other positions, which is a problem for the rest of the options outside of Dana East, who I think is the worst scorer from a fantasy perspective, is a mainly outside kind of less tackle player. Megan Kaufman, Hayley Miller and Gabby O'Sullivan have all played other positions under Lisa Webb, who's the current coach, who is also probably one of the most changeable coaches in the game. So I think Ash McCarthy is the one that I'd say most likely to get a bulk of that tackle role. She's had a very high tackle game, even at West Coast. But I do think that if I was going to pick one player, it'd be Hayley Miller, because I do believe that she's the most consistent option if she gets the role. It's just a real catch. It's a real impossible choice at this stage to know, is she going to get trusted playing that role full time again? If she gets placed forward, that's a 40. She's not a very good scorer inside forward 50 when only playing there. Whereas Ash McCarthy, they played a game in the weekend in like 100 mil of rain, and she had 15 or 16 tackles and had 130. I don't think that that's going to happen every week. And I think that there are definitely games where she gives away more free kicks than she takes. She tries to break a few too many tackles, gets people high, and there's a 60 or 70 there waiting. So that void of significance could be filled bit part. It could be filled by one person. But in terms of teams I trust to give me the right answer quickly, Fremantle is the lowest position on that trust rating possible.
Yeah, it really feels like Lisa Webb is still trying to work out the best mix, and without two of her best players, we might see that chopping and changing continue all through the upcoming season. I think we're up to traps now, so who's your traps in the midfield?
Traps in the midfield. So thinking about the kind of most expensive players, I think that up front, Emma Swanson is a trap. Looks like she's going to play more time across halfback this year. And so Charlie Thomas was the highest averaging defender from last year who stayed as a defender this year. She only averaged a 72. And Emma Swanson, amazing as she might be, she's not going to average above 92 if she plays mainly as a defender. So even if you think that they've got a good run and they've got the early double game week, which we've got for the first time this year in AFLW, I still don't think she's worth picking. The other potential trap for my mind is Bree Davey, who is again battling injury this preseason. She's priced at 89, was a popular pick for a bunch of teams last year, coming in massively underpriced and then having the best score of round one when she played in the opening game. But I don't think that that's going to be on offer again. And I do think that with all of the forwards that are missing at Collingwood, they didn't have many to begin with. And then one of their few options who kicked a few last year, Nell Morris-Dalton, is missing the season with injury. I wouldn't be shocked if she's playing predominantly forward this year.
And who are the rookies we should be looking at for the midfield to get our cash generation going?
Yeah, this is an incredibly fruitful spot for rookies, and it's a real tough position at the moment. Do you go with a kind of pure premiums and rookies, guns and rooks strategy this season, which doesn't feel, I don't love doing because there's only 5 spots on field versus when you play men's, you've got a lot more options and you can kind of put some extra, spin on it. But I think the number one rookie you have to have is Shanae Goody. If you don't have her on field, you're making a mistake. So preseason selection before the draft comes in basement priced. She goes pick 1 or pick 2 if Port Adelaide don't have that selection. She's averaged 94 in the SANFL-W before she turned 18. She's a 2-time under 18 All-Australian. She's got, beautiful kick on both feet, great in the midfield, can play on a wing, can play off halfback, incredibly clean. Played a practice match against Melbourne, scored 111, had a perfect score build, 5 tackles, 7 marks, bunch of touches, inside 50s, rebounds 50s. She looked like a 3rd or 4th year player. She's absolutely incredible. She'll make a bunch of cash. She may not need to leave your side for more than 2/3 of the season. So that's the number one rookie you've got to have. The next one that I think is a must is actually there's a few here. So Piper Window, pending injury. So this is another one of the with the way the AFLW draft works, she was taken as the first pick from South Australia, but she would have been a top 3 to 5 pick if she'd been going in the national draft. She's potentially picked up an ankle injury, but she's averaged 95 fantasy points and also won the SANFL-W Best and Fairest last year. And then when she's played this year, she's averaged like a 98 in the SANFL-W in the preseason. A big-bodied midfielder, looks like she'll play a little bit off half forward, some in the midfield, and has just elite scoring pedigree in the past. Some other options to consider. Mattia Breed from the Hawks, priced at $350K. She had a predominantly CBA role, is a pretty decently sized midfielder, had a stack of CBAs. I think she scored an 80 in the preseason game. So, and with a new coach at Hawthorn, it's a good sign that she's one of the first options that they've thrown in there this year. Some other options that I liked the look of, who is another option in the midfield? So there's actually another one from Port Adelaide, Caitlin Wendland, who, beautiful left foot kick, another one with SANFL-W scoring pedigree. She was on the Brisbane list last year, but moved because there was just no game time for her, has been picked up and looked amazing in the practice match on the weekend. Couple other options who've popped. Maddie Gearin is a former kind of 50 averaging forward a couple of seasons ago, but an ACL injury that she then re-aggravated means she's lost the last 2 seasons, but is a high tackling, kind of can average 55, and we've seen her do it before. It's just if she gets the role back in a different Carlton side that she left. And then maybe one last one. I liked what I saw from Grace Beasley and Charlotte Simpson, $300K from Melbourne and St Kilda. May not pop immediately, but were given CBA roles and minutes and come in with the kind of body that's built for inside mid role. Look like they've kind of got the shoulder width to be able to take at least a few CBAs. So midfield rookies, there's an absolute stack. It's just a pity we don't have a longer bench to fit them all in.
And one player that probably fits outside the rookie price range, just above the rookie price range, is Caitlin. I can't think of her. I can't pronounce.
Caitlin Sirhoy.
Yeah, that's her at GWS. She's been talked about quite a bit as well.
Yes, I do think that she'll play sometime in the midfield, but I do think that having watched a lot of GWS, I think they're one of the most talented teams. They, outside of the kind of their top level scorers, it's sometimes you can score 20s 3 weeks in a row. And we've seen that with rookies in the past. And we haven't got a clear sense of what her role is going to be this year. It's been, she might play midfield, she might play off half-back, she might roll through the half-forward line. And her under 18s and Coates League scoring is fine. It's just not spectacular.
Fair enough. Let's move to the ruck line. Probably not as much to talk about here because you've got Alice Edmonds, who is probably going to go to another level. Is she too good to pass up, or is she overpriced?
I think she's too good to pass up. There's no competition on the list for her. There's a fairly decent market share on offer for her if she wants to take it. She's the most difficult ruck to go against because she's so tall. She's improved every single year that she's played. So she was a 20 averaging player when she started at Richmond, but it's just clearly gotten so much better. And I think that just taking a haircut off the most expensive ruck, but for someone that if they're not top two by the end of the season, I'll be shocked. And it's literally the most incredible run for the first 3 games of this year, and then has a double game week in round 4, which is the first they have it. It's too good to pass up.
Who else is too good to pass up?
There was one that I could have talked about, Montana McKinnon, who has come across from Adelaide to Richmond, but she did an ACL last week. So unfortunately, I can't talk about her. The rucks are really difficult. I think I could make a case for Mimstrom. So she's just a hair cheaper than Alice Edmonds. But I think you talked about there being an absence of some key players at Fremantle. Mimstrom probably could benefit from taking some of the tackles that leave with Stannett and Bowers going out the door. She's 22, going 23. This is her 6th AFLW season. She has improved her fantasy average literally every single year. And I think she's probably the most consistent ruck kind of in the comp. Like we see the same thing week in, week out from her. I wouldn't begrudge anyone who decides to go slightly different than an Edmonds, who I think is playing in a far worse football team and may suffer as a result, going across to Strom for a kind of mid-table option who I would not be shocked if it's an 83, 84 average this year, which would be top 2.
When we go to breakouts, there's one team that sticks out to me as probably being where this breakout comes from, and it's the Giants ruck situation. So Fleur Davies is the most expensive Giant ruck in fantasy. Is that where the breakout is going to be?
So the Giants ruck situation is a real tough one. I think Fleur Davis is the most highly touted. She came in her draft class as the highest kind of rated ruck, but went very late because of, again, the rules around state-based drafting. Unfortunately, I don't actually rate her at all. I don't actually think she's got the tank nor the size to make up for the lack of tank at the moment. And she also doesn't score very well when she sits forward. The player that I think looks best of the current rucks at GWS is actually a rookie who's played less than 6 games of AFL football in their career. And that's Ailish O'Dowd. So 25-year-old, come across from Gaelic football, 181 centimetres. She clearly made an impression early at the Giants because within a couple of months of her arriving, she was playing full-time ruck game in the VFLW in the preseason and got coaches' votes. I think she had 30 hit-outs. She looked absolutely incredible. Now, she's raw as ever, gave away a few running too far free kicks because, she's incredibly tall but very athletic. I think that for fantasy purposes, she has that quickness once the ball hit the ground that you love to see. And I think I don't think she breaks out into the full premium tier, but if she goes into that mid-price range pretty quickly, or at least makes enough of impression that she's pushing 50, priced at where she is below 25, she's my number one candidate. But I also don't trust GWS to make the right call. They do some weird things with their rucks, so I'm not going to be shocked if Davis continues to get a run because they did make a decent incised investment in her.
All right. And who's a trap in the ruck line?
I think up front, anyone that plays for Carlton's a trap. We just don't know where and whom is going to ruck predominantly. Brianne Moody is the second most expensive, but Carlton already had two very good rucks in Brianne and Jess Good, who both averaged over 70 last year. They've added another rucks forward in Brianne's sister, Celine, twin sister, who has shown flashes of being a premium ruck at times when she was at the Western Bulldogs. But I think if you pick any one of them up, don't do it. It's just going to end in most likely tears unless we find out a month from now that someone's got an injury or they've got something locked down. In terms of other options, for traps, I think the other one is don't get sucked into the kind of former premium status of Gabby Seymour because it sounds like she's going to play predominantly as a defender, maybe chopping out because Richmond sounds like they've always wanted to switch her back there. She's the most undersized of the rucks in the AFLW, still incredibly adept, but it does seem like Richmond want to persist with her as a defender. So that 65 is more likely to be something in the 40s this year.
And what about rookies in the ruck line?
I've already mentioned my favourite in Eilish O'Dowd. The other one to talk about is Lily Pearce, who was brought in as an injury replacement player for Geelong, and Geelong basically have no rucks, dedicated full-time rucks left on their list. They lost Erin Hall, their main ruck last year, to retirement, and then Liv Fuller, who'd rucked predominantly for them a few seasons ago, has taken a season off for work. Pearce comes in as one of the best hit-out kind of tap rucks in the VFLW, spent last year's season on the list at Richmond but didn't play. The problem with Pearce is she's not a particularly high possession player, mainly relies on hit-outs, has some games where she can really tackle well. I think there was she had a 90 in the VFLW where she had 4 disposals and I think 4 disposals and 95 points. So that tells you it was built almost entirely off tackles and hit-outs. But I don't like it as much because having watched her in the preseason match, looked very passive. I think she scored a 20, but had 0 disposals. So it's a real risk, but of the rookie ruck, she has easily the best role. The other one that I think is an option is Georgie Cleaver. So this is a former netballer at West Coast. Sounds like she'll play as a defender for a team that is desperate for taller defenders. Now, she missed, I think, because of illness in the preseason game, but she played in a match simulation and looked good. Would have loved some stats, but I won't be shocked if she becomes someone who makes a couple of 100K to start this year.
And finally, let's move to the forward line. Who is overpriced in the forward line?
Whoa, a lot of them.
Before you start, we spoke about Freo's off-season additions. Anya Tai comes in over $1 million.
Yeah.
She's not going to get to that height again, is she?
I don't think she is. I think that, not Beck Webster, what's her name? Gabby Newton will eat into some of her targets. She was kind of a black hole, everything fed through her if Fremantle were going to score last year, in part because they have almost no dedicated forwards. It was all just midfielders who didn't look comfortable, and Tiger's an extremely athletic player. I think that if she puts up a 60, 65, I won't be shocked, but that's just not going to cut it. If you're picking someone at over 900K, you want them to be locked in, guaranteed top line. she'd be probably my number one candidate. I also think that I would have some concerns about if we're talking about players who are like, priced inside the top 10 for forwards. Eden Zanker is a likely drop this year because I don't think Melbourne are going to be as good. And having watched them now a couple of times this preseason, she's not able to sit deep forward and get a lot of the points through goals, which she did last year. She was equal leading goal kicker for the comp. I just don't like what Melbourne are doing at the moment and think there might be less ball inside 50 and as a result, less scoring for her.
So Bonnie Toogood comes in at 1.3 million. Is she overpriced or is she actually too good to pass up?
So I think it is both. And forgive me for bending the categories a little bit. She is she's 17 points average better than any other forward. She plays a role that is near impossible to lock down on. And every team going up against the Bombers last year knew that the Bombers were going to rely on Bonnie Toogood. I'm not going to be shocked if she doesn't manage to score 102 or average 102 again this year. But I think she will average over 90, most likely average over 95, which I think is still going to be 10 points better than anyone else in the forwards. It's going to be very difficult to be giving up that many points. And the forwards are filled with unknowns. I think Bonnie probably loses some cash, but it's still too good to pass up given the gap to literally anyone else.
Who else is too good to pass up?
This is the toughest line to say that for because there's literally no certain things in the forward line. I think there's a case to be made for Kate Hoare being too good to pass up because by all accounts, she will play more time in the midfield this year. She's their Melbourne's captain. I get the sense that in much the same way that Bonnie is played where the ball is, Kate Hoare, given the bodies that Melbourne have lost this year, will be given a better role to just accumulate and try and stem the tide or really create different results. She's the second most expensive forward, but I do think that the ceiling scores, which she's had in the last few years, are going to be more plentiful. And I think fewer floor scores because they're going to need to put her close to the ball more often. So she's someone that in some matchups goes 50 or 60 and you're left feeling disappointed if she's not scored a few goals. I just think an increased midfield time makes that an 80 as a floor. And she scored 140 in a game last year in 3 and a bit quarters. So she's got an incredible ceiling.
What category does Katie Brennan sit in for you?
The world's largest avenue of apprehension. She is incredibly consistent. Last season really did put together just consistent scores all year and became a really, decent forward for fantasy. My issue with her is injuries. So she's had ankles, feet, knee injuries affecting her for each of the last 4 seasons. And she's a stalwart of the competition and a great forward, but injuries have affected her basically every game she's ever played. Now, by all accounts, she's healthy this preseason. I have it on good authority. I just get worried. And when she's injured, she often still plays, but sits really deep. And it becomes not a player who can score 75. It's a player who scores 40, is really important, kicks 2 goals, and you're left frustrated as a fantasy player.
Who's breaking out in the forward line for you?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. I think there's 2 options. One of them is Courtney Hodder. So has long been cast as just, a small forward and probably the most electric small forward. She's a former touch rugby player, as quick over 5 meters as I think you'll find anywhere. The breakout comes from her tackling when she gets thrown as a CBA player. And that's something, and the kind of elite foot speed is something that Brisbane's midfield mix probably lacks. They've got the class of an Ali Anderson. They've got the tackling in and under player in a Belle Dawes. They can throw in some of their kind of out, like their wingers into the midfield mix, and they always do look good. But that tackling pressure from Courtney Hodder is pretty unrivaled. She scored, I think she had 18 tackles in the grand final last year. So that's not priced in there.
18.
The problem being that she doesn't always get put in the midfield
right,
because she's also so good forward. It's a real unknown. If she plays, I'd say 30% midfield time, I think she can average over 70.
Has Brisbane brought in anyone that could possibly take Hodder's forward time to allow her to go into the midfield?
No, but I think the advantage here is we saw more midfield time back end of last year, last 2 rounds, and then a lot more in the finals. So she had CBAs, I think, in each of the finals, and even in the grand final. I don't know if she had I don't think she had a huge amount, but she did have CBAs. And so I think it's that finals realization of, this is a key cog for an electric midfield group that can win the premiership. That means that she's more likely to see it. And in the practice match, she sat forward in the first half, I think had 3 disposals and a goal, sitting on 20 points. She ends above 80 because she lays, I think, 6 tackles in the third quarter. So this is the real conundrum. If given that time in the midfield, incredible scoring capability, it's a real watch.
You said you had a second player for this category.
The second one is Gabby O'Sullivan. So has been a top liner before, has an incredible ability to tackle. It's just, again, a question if she plays in the midfield, or it sounds like she may even drift across halfback. I think priced at 39, I think that there's maybe someone who can push 70 if she chops it between the midfield and defence. The question is, if she plays forward, it's not a good scorer. She's not a good scorer inside 50. She doesn't kick that many goals to be able to push her really bad games up into a decent enough area. So again, it's a role question. And with the limited information we ever get in the AFLW and the very small pre-seasons, no training footage, etc., again, it's a real role-dependent breakout.
I've got a name I want to throw at you.
Shoot.
Mia Austin. 543k. Yes. Is she a chance to break out?
She is a chance. My big question on Carlton is how do they balance good, Moody, and the addition of Celine Moody as a tall forward with Austin, who, off the top of my head, I'd say she's like 178, 179 centimetres, beautiful pair of hands, could become a Katie Brennan type. I don't think it's impossible that she breaks out. I just want to see it from Carlton because I think they're going to run into some teething issues trying to balance all of those taller targets, and someone is going to have to rest forward.
Yeah. She's in my team. I really like the cut of her jib, I should say. Who are the rookies for the forward line?
So the number one rookie for my mind is Michaela Pauga. Scored horrendously as a small forward, low time on ground in Brisbane's grand final side. But she's come across the GWS, had an awesome run of scoring in the VFLW, playing entirely midfield minutes. We interviewed her on the podcast this pre-season. She's come across, it sounds like she's playing midfield, very understanding of her role, very eloquent, like a great person to talk to. She lays tackles really well. She's an in and under player. I think that she replaces Haneen Zarika, who played a similar role last year, but I'm expecting to play almost entirely forward this year. She's priced at 28. I think she can go at 55, 60. And if she just fully replaces Zarika, that's a 65 scoring role, which in our forward lines is desperately necessary. The other ones that I like in my forward line, Ruby Tripodi. This is a question of role, but she's got the skill to play at North Melbourne. She played entirely midfield in the practice match and looked really good, took marks in transitions, worked well with Ash Riddell and Jazz Garner. Yasmin Dersma is another transfer. So she went from Port to Carlton. 350k, looks to be playing across halfback. Again, comes with all of those Carlton halfback disclaimers that I had earlier, but has the talent. Went reasonably high, went in Port Adelaide's first draft, I think maybe pick the fourth of their picks. Some other forwards that I like, Ella Smith from the Gold Coast Suns. I was talking about the fact that Ali Drennan had left and there was a need for a fourth rotational midfielder at the Suns, it seems like Ella is one of the options that they're considering. It's a question if she gets that role or if it's a Maddie Brancatisano who does take it. But I think at 300k, she's a definite option. But the forward rookies are definitely one of the hardest. The only other one that I could put my name to is Annalie McKee. So playing is possibly the only capable forward marking target at the Western Bulldogs. If the Bulldogs are going to kick it to anyone, it's probably going to be funneled through her. And it does also seem like she'll be the chop-out ruck for Edmonds. That's what we saw in the practice match at least. And I don't think she's going to get much fantasy pressure from the number one draft pick at the Western Bulldogs in Christy Lee Weston-Turner, who is a trap, undoubtedly a trap. And I wouldn't be picking her. Looks incredibly raw and looks like, actually, funnily enough, almost the way that Jamara Ugle-Hagan looked incredibly raw when he first started as a high draft pick at the Western Bulldogs. Not a fantasy scorer just yet and won't push Annalie McKee for maybe a 40 to 45 average.
All right. There's a position we haven't covered yet, and that is utility. For people who don't usually play the fantasy format, how does the utility position work? And how would you utilize it for AFLW Fantasy specifically?
Yeah, so the utility the bench operates differently for AFLW. You've got 16 players on field, 5, 5, 1, 5, and then you have a bench player for each of the four lines. The utility, and you don't have to pick an emergency, it's just the player that you have sitting on the bench for that position. The utility operates as a free position. You can pick it for any line that you like, but they can't be an emergency in that position. For using it for AFLW Fantasy, I see there as being two main options. One, just pick the best averaging player that you can. It can come from any line. I think this year it's most likely going to be a midfielder, given the port options that we've got. I think Matea Breed. I think there's a whole stack of midfield rookies that you could pick from. I think you could make a case for some defensive ones as well. The other option is to try and this was something a lot of people did last year. If you're unsure of a ruck, or if you know that you're not unsure of who the rookies are in the forward line, those ones where there's going to be very few options and you just want to make sure you've got the right one, you could just pick that extra player and put it in your utility. So if you're unsure who the best rookie ruck is going to be out of O'Dowd and Pearce, pick both of them. And then because of the speed of price movements, get rid of one after 1 week, after you've kind of seen it in a real live match situation. I'm not certain that that's not something I'm looking to do necessarily this year, but for the rucks, and I could also make the case for the forwards, you could run that as a play just to make sure you've got the right ones, you've covered all the bases, chop off the player that doesn't look as good. Or if you know, particularly for the forwards, that you might want to do a restructure, get an extra rookie on field, or you're looking to bring another forward in, you can bump like the worst rookie off and put that back in the midfield, for example. So that's the two strategies I think you can use. You can use it just purely pick the best player, don't worry about it, or you can think more strategically about what your post round one trade restructure might look like given the uncertainties that you have.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us, Liam. Where can people find you?
Absolute pleasure for having me on. You can find me on Twitter at Liam AFLW Fantasy, and you can find Free Kick kind of wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got a YouTube channel that uploads just the audio stream on there, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's Free Kick W Pod.
And that's it for this very special episode of the Footy Mailbag. If you haven't given us a rating on your listening platform of choice, please do so. It helps new listeners find us. Thefootymailbag.net is our website. Thanks for listening. We'll talk next time.